Hi, this is Paul Tyler, and welcome to another episode of That Annuity Show. Ramsey, good morning.
Great to be here.
It's a cold but beautiful day here in New York. I think the wind chill factor was 35 degrees with blossoms outside. So I don't know what happened, but you're in Atlanta. We have a great guest on the another coast. Do you want to do the intros?
I'd be happy to. So we're super fortunate to have Steve Vernon join us today. So I've been in a back and forth conversation with Steve for probably about a year to get him on the show. We've been just really lucky to have some of the great leading lights in retirement research, and Steve's time has come. So we're really excited to have him here. So Steve has a great history in the space. He's currently the president of the Rest of Life Communications Company, his own company, and for 9 years was a consulting research scholar at the Stanford Longevity Center, which is one of the leading academic institutions in the space. So Steve, we are delighted to have you here today. Again, it's been a long time coming, and we were looking forward to hearing about your latest book and all the things you're doing to really change the way we approach retirement in this country.
Well, Ramsey and Paul, thanks for having me on your show. So I look forward to a fun time today.
Yeah, well so Steve, let me lead off the first question. Stanford Center, tell us about the Stanford Center. What is it doing? What's it focus? And what have you been up to there over the last few years?
Well, my time there is what we now call an encore career. And I had a long career. My main career was as a consulting actuary, helping large employers manage their retirement programs. And during the 90s and the early 2000s, I was really on the front line of those companies converting from traditional pensions to 401k plans. And I knew why the employers wanted to do that transition, but I felt this puts a lot of burden on the employees for how much to save, how to invest, and then when they get to their retirement age, what do they do with their savings? And so as I wound down my primary career, I got interested in researching and writing about basically how do you transition to retirement. The Stanford Center on Longevity, their basic premise is that people are living a lot longer lives than in prior generations, and we as a society aren't ready for that. And there are lots of manifestations of that assumption. One of them is long retirements. And so it used to be my grandparents were retired for about 10 years. And planning for a 10-year retirement is a lot easier than planning for a 30-year retirement. So that just got me interested. And so for the last 15 years, I've been writing and researching on how do you transition to retirement and plan for a long retirement.
So tell us about your last book. So it was called Don't Go Broke in Retirement, and you've written a number of different books on the subject. And tell us, what are the angles you were focused on in that book?
Well, that book was based on research, the latest research project we did at the Stanford Center on Longevity, and what we were studying was. You've got, you're someone in your 60s, you've got some money in a 401k or an IRA. Now what? How do you know if there is enough money? And actually, as you know, there are lots of ways you can use your savings to convert into a stream of income. And so I work with two other researchers, Wade Pfau, who's been on your show, and Joe Tomlinson. And we studied 292 different retirement income strategies. Using very sophisticated techniques that I used when I was helping companies manage their pension plans, using those same analytical techniques to analyze and compare 292 different strategies. And one of the 292 strategies came out as being extremely straightforward and very powerful. And it could be implemented in any 401k or any IRA, and maybe without the help of a financial advisor. Now, a financial advisor would be helpful, but it was so simple that, in theory, someone could implement it by themselves. And so I thought, well, this is great. This is what middle-income people need, because I see the statistics. The vast majority of people transitioning to retirement do not work with a financial advisor. So that study identified this method, and so we called it the Spend Safely in Retirement strategy, and I decided to write a book on it. That's what the book is. Don't Go Broke in Retirement, a simple plan to generate lifetime retirement income.
So tell us what some of the first principles are in that strategy.
Well, we start with making Social Security as big as possible, because for middle income people, they're going to be getting 2/3, 3/4, or more of their total retirement income from Social Security. So it makes a lot of sense to make that as big as possible. When you think about it, Social Security is paid for the rest of your life, no matter how long you live, so it addresses longevity risk. It won't go down if the stock market crashes, so it addresses market risk. And it's indexed for inflation, so it addresses inflation risk. So it's the best retirement income source for middle income people. So step one is to make that as big as possible. And we talk about using a Social Security bridge strategy, which let me address that later. But that's step one. And then step two is, what do you do with your savings? And our research shows that if you just use a common balanced fund or target date fund and use the IRS required minimum distribution, which most IRA companies or 401k companies can help you implement, that works pretty good. And so I've just expressed this strategy now to you. Optimize Social Security, and with your savings, invest it in a target date fund, use the IRS required minimum distribution. That works pretty good. So we call that a base strategy, and then we have a number of modifications in case you want to customize the strategy to your circumstances, but start with the base strategy, and that's the advice in the book.
Now, some of your other books, though, I think you have gone beyond, right? So I get the basics. I get my income kind of locked in here. Steve, you've kind of explored a lot of other areas. I mean, health, work, where I live, what my final years look like, what my legacy lives. At what point do you start to factor that into? Do you start and do the base plan, then go back, answer these other questions? Now you've solved one number and then refine the next. How do these pieces fit together?
Well, and Paul, that's a great question, because I do like to say that the decisions you make as you transition in retirement are more complex and have higher stakes than just, and I'm being a little facetious, just saving and investing while you're working. So I lay out a series of all these decisions that end up being very important. And really start with, though, if you haven't yet retired, start with the most important decision, which is when and how to retire. And I show that between age 62 and 70, that's what I call the retirement opportunity zone. And the longer you can delay retirement between that zone, the more retirement income you'll have. And so start with that decision. And then, if you analyze that correctly, the vast majority of people have not saved enough money to retire full-time at age 65 under their current level of spending. I want to repeat that because this is a powerful conclusion that everybody needs to grasp, is that the vast majority of people in their late 50s and early 60s have not saved enough money to retire full-time at age 65 under their current level of spending. So they either have to work longer or reduce their spending or some combination. Those are tough decisions. And if you really need to reduce your spending, then that gets into, well, okay, what are my biggest spending targets? Your house, so now you get into where you should live. And so you see, it's kind of a cascade of decisions. And so I think start with analyzing that first question. When should I retire? How much income can I expect? And then you see what your current spending is, and a whole set of cascading decisions go from there.
So can I just jump in there?
Sure.
Because we had Bill Bengen on just in the last month. So the father of the 4% rule. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is that he he focused very much on that same issue. In fact, I think he was mentioned in the Wall Street Journal just recently, focusing on specifically that issue. Like, this is the big element, the common thread between maybe the two sides of the argument of the 4% rule may ultimately be this issue of like controlling spending and how one goes about doing that. So it's very fascinating to hear you talk about that and talk about that process. And so, in your books, how do you guide people on getting through that process? Because it can be as much emotional as financial.
Well, Ramsey, you're right. And that's actually my last project at the Stanford Center on Longevity is looking at the emotional issues and the psychological issues at play when people make these decisions. And so that's an issue, too. In the books I write, I try and keep it as simple as possible and guide them step by step. And actually, that's what our research on decision-making is showing, is that people need a simple step-by-step guide to help them go through these decisions. And a lot of them just aren't getting that step-by-step guide. So that's kind of the short answer, is that I think everybody who's connected with how people decide to retire, when I say everybody, employers, financial institutions, financial advisors, nonprofit organizations, anybody who has an interest on how people transition into retirement, really have to pay attention to how people make decisions, because it's not all logical. In fact, it's often not logical. And at the heart of some of the issues is just people need help. They need help. These are complex decisions.
So I've seen some interesting research. I've seen it from a couple different sources. So either they're all talking about the same study, or it's independent data confirming the same thing, which is generally people are more happy after 50 than they are in their 20s and 30s. Now, is that a result, Steve, that most people are getting that kind of help, or they're kind of sorting their way through, or is it they'd be a lot happier if they had help? The numbers would be even better.
Well, actually, that finding that you mentioned, the director at the Stanford Center on Longevity, where I work, helped do some of that research.
Oh, interesting.
And we kind of sit around tables. Why is that? And discuss that. But it's kind of interesting. Is that first of all, if you get into your 50s and 60s, you've kind of made your peace with whatever happened during your life, and at that point, also, if you had a family, they might be leaving the house, and there's less stress of raising a family. And we've had kids, but so we loved raising kids, but it is less stress not having them in the house all the time. Particularly when they're 2 and 3 and 4 little toddlers and they have a lot of demands on them. So, that phase of life is usually gone. Maybe your main career is winding down, so work stress is going away. And so it's just a combination of factors that people basically are kind of making peace with their life, and certain stresses are going away, and they're looking forward to a time in their life when they don't have as much stress and they have a lot more freedom of time.
Yeah, and then you mentioned process. I think, easy advice to everybody is, work longer, save money. Okay, great. What do I do at my house? I wake up January 1st, Ramsey, probably 70% of my income is already spent, right? Committed to for the rest of the year. See, if you have a process, does that make that change typically make that transition smoother or in steps? Because to do that make those kind of changes all at once, that's hard, and that's disruptive.
Right. So all the decisions we focus on are a process. In fact, we did a study in 2015. We called it the decision to retire, and it was clear that people's views evolve from their 50s as they get closer and closer to retirement. Their views on life are evolving, and a lot of these decisions don't need to be made all at once, and that's part of the way to make it not so overwhelming is to say, here's the order of priority of decisions you need to make, and some of these decisions can be deferred. Just to say the obvious, a lot of people don't move right away when they retire, even though that might help them financially, but there's so many other decisions to make that they don't, and then you get to your mid-60s or even 70, you go, let's move somewhere better that works better for our lives and we can save some money. So that's where to live is a decision that doesn't need to be made when you retire, but ideally would be made fairly soon thereafter. But once again, you kind of have to break it down into steps. Make this decision first, then this, and so on.
So you talked about the retirement opportunity zone, the 62 to 70 time horizon, and bridging strategies you mentioned earlier. What are some of the bridging strategies that you've presented as ideas? 'Cause I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with. I think that first you have to get people to understand the value of deferring Social Security, and then they got to figure out, well, how do I cover that? How do I cover that zone? What are some of the best tools to think about that?
Well, Ramsey, thanks and for asking that question, because that's key. Is that if someone's in their mid-60s and they've got some money in their IRA and 401k, one of the most important decisions they have is, what do I do with this savings? And our research shows that by far the best use of your savings is to deploy a Social Security bridge strategy. So let me explain what that is. Suppose you're age 65 and you're retiring, but the analysis shows that the best thing for you to do is to delay Social Security until age 70. And you're thinking, I don't want to work till 70. I want to retire now. So a Social Security bridge strategy would operate as follows. It says, if I'd retired now, I'd have an income, just to make it simple, of $2,000 per month from Social Security. I'll take that out of my savings instead of starting Social Security. And if you did the math, $2,000 a month for 12 months is $24,000 times 5 is 5 years from 65 to 70 is 120-some thousand. I'd have to get my calculator out and do the math, but let's just say it's 120,000. I would set aside 120,000, and that's what I'll draw on between 65 and 70 to replace the Social Security benefit that I'm delaying. I've done the math. That strategy generates way more retirement income than any other strategy. It generates more income than the 4% rule. It generates more income than buying an annuity. It's the best way to add to your retirement income. So I think a lot of strategies for middle-income people should start with a Social Security bridge strategy. Now, let me just say a couple things. Is that the only thing that's better than a Social Security bridge strategy is to work a little bit longer. And so in this example I was talking about, I said, suppose your retirement income from Social Security would have been $2,000 a month. Find a part-time job that pays you $2,000 a month. And there are other advantages to part-time work. It gets you out in the world, and you have social contacts, and maybe you get health insurance from your employer. So that's actually the only thing that's better than a Social Security bridge strategy. And that gets into what I was talking about earlier. There's a holistic view of retirement. Can you still be happy and work part-time for a while? And what kind of work might seem appealing to you? That's part of all the decisions that people face.
So that's interesting because for a number of reasons. So probably one of the things that people sort of struggle with when they extend their work life into what would otherwise be retirement is they might say, well, gee, I'm not making as much money as I used to. I'm not sure how I feel about that. But what you're saying is very interesting. Is that your bogey isn't what you used to make. Your bogey is the amount of Social Security payments that you're foregoing in a given month, plus all of the other qualitative benefits that you mentioned as well. So I think that's sort of I think it's a very critical thing to sort of help people think about, because it's very easy to look back as opposed to looking forward.
Well, right. And also, I give the strategy, and I have to caveat it by saying easier said than done. For some people,
Sure.
It can be hard to find part-time work, or they have health issues. And so it's not right for everybody. And that's actually a key point, is that the retired population is so diverse that there's just not one silver bullet that'll work for everybody. And if you're working with people, you just have to understand their circumstances. So I think this work longer issue can work for a lot of people, but not everybody.
Now, I was reading a book it's on the New York Times bestseller list. Arthur Brooks wrote a book, I think Strength to Strength. I don't know if you've seen it or not. He kind of explores some of the same issues, and one of his theses is it's a good time in later age to sort of take what were strengths and sort of modify them. Like Steve, you mentioned, okay, maybe I'm not trying to chase that extra S in my title, or this is some professional achievement. I can step back and say, well, what is it I really enjoyed? How do I move that? Do you think that's going to be more important for people because we're all living longer? Retirement can last a really long time. Is part of that transition thinking about, well, maybe I'm not working with my current employer, but I'm redefining, rechanging. I'm doing the consulting opportunity. Will we see more of that, do you think, over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, ideally, yes. And I like to encourage people, think about your work life, your career, and write down what about that you enjoyed and what about that you didn't enjoy. And let's get more of what you enjoy and less of what you didn't enjoy. And again, that's easier said than done for some folks, but I think a lot of people, they get into their 60s, and what's common is working full time, getting in the subway, driving to work, whatever it is, that drag, so having a little more flexibility and a little more time. And actually, I've done the math that shows that, working part-time from 65 to 70 rather than full-time doesn't really drop your eventual retirement income very much. The vast majority of the benefit of delaying comes from just delaying. It doesn't come from continuing to add more savings. So a strategy I like to espouse is try and figure out what your living expenses are, just your basic living expenses, and work just enough to cover those for a while. And a lot of people are a lot happier if they just aren't going into work 5 days a week, working overtime. Just that alone helps a lot of people. But then beyond that, not having the pressure of trying to advance your career, just trying to help people, do a good job, take pride in your work. These are all things that can make people happier in their work life in their later years.
So, do you plan to continue your work with your own company, like well into retirement? Like, what are your plans there?
Well, I'm actually practicing what I'm preaching here. I'm almost age 69, and so I've been working just like I've been saying. I haven't been driving into work every day. In California, you drive to work. You don't take the subway. So I'm working probably about a 40-hour a week, which, given my prior career, I'd call that part-time. But so I've been doing that, and my whole work is about helping people, and it feels good to help people. And I'm using my skills and my expertise. And so I think in a general sense, if you can take the skills and expertise you had during your primary career and use that in some way to help people, a lot of people, that's really powerful. And that's what I'm doing. And so I'm planning to do that for as long as it feels right. I don't have a magic age at which I plan to stop. I can see at some point, and maybe in my 70s, I'd wind it down, but I don't have to make that decision. So it's really one step at a time.
All right, so I can't resist, because it's something I've spent a lot of time on myself, and we've talked about it here, which is in-plan annuities. So you were very critical, or you played a very critical role, I should say, in the conversion process from pensions to defined contribution plans as sort of the primary vehicle at companies. And so now, with the Secure Act, there's this movement. It's moving very slowly, but towards bringing guaranteed income solutions back in plan. Do you have a view on that? Do you think it's likely to work? Any sort of initial thoughts you have on what the future is of the 401k in a post-Secure Act?
So, Ramsey, thanks for asking that question, because that is one of my, I can get on my soapbox on that one. I mentioned I worked for decades helping employers run their retirement plans and then their 401k plans. And I've been saying to anybody who'll listen, right now 401k plans, the vast majority of them are savings plans. They are not retirement plans. Mm-hmm. And to be a true retirement plan, they need to have easy ways to convert your savings into a stream of income. And I've been advocating that to anybody who'll listen. And I'm advocating a basic retirement income menu people are used to an investment menu, and I think we need a retirement income menu. And you'd have at least 3 options. And one would be a Social Security bridge strategy, like I talked about earlier, and that could easily be implemented in a 401k plan using a stable value fund or a short-term bond fund. So that's option number 1. Option number 2 would be some kind of an annuity, and that would help protect the retiree against longevity risk. They don't have to manage it. They wouldn't have investment risk. And so some kind of an annuity that the employer has vetted and is more efficient than, say, an annuity you might buy on the retail market. And so that's number 2. And then the third one would be just some kind of a scheme to invest your money through the 401k plan with a target date fund and draw it down, possibly using the required minimum distribution that I talked about. But you could also implement some version of the 4% rule. And those 3 options would give the basic ingredients to the vast majority of retirees to build a portfolio of retirement income. And so that's another concept that I advocate, is that we're all used to hearing a diversified portfolio of savings. Now we need a diversified portfolio of retirement income. So anyway, that's at least my first answer to that your question.
Well, okay, so we could have a whole other show on this one. I know this. So a question I'll throw out related is what's the future role of the advisor? And I'll throw out a couple of notions. One is you don't need advisors. It's really a software-based solution. Employers are going to put a portal up, and they're going to have great software that will make it easier for Steve and Ramsey Paul to navigate through it. The other is more engagement with advisors. The Secure Act took a little bit of the risk away from whoever the plan sponsor is. Okay, so it could be easier for somebody to show up. I've also seen some very interesting, startups spring up that allow RIAs to actually manage 401k plans for individuals, and presumably that would include advice that would help with a human provide that kind of menu advice. I mean, what software versus person in helping out? What do you think? What's the future?
Well, Paul, you said, there could be some software that Ramsey, Paul, and Steve could use, and we might be the only ones that could. Or people and so what I'm getting at is that the majority of people don't feel comfortable making these very important decisions just on software. The 3 of us might, but most people won't. And so I think there's some kind of human interface needs there to be there. And actually some combination where the advisor might be using the same software that ideally the 3 of us could use. And so I hope that's the direction we go in. Because it is clear for these middle-income retirees, the economics really aren't there for them to have a personal advisor sitting there for hours going over their own situation. And so they need to have this target audience, that's where my heart goes out to. They need to have some kind of educational material that works them through it, the issues, and so that the advisor just comes in at key points. And we aren't there yet, but we need to get there. That's again, I could talk for hours on that, but that's the short answer on that.
I mean, so this is the significant challenge here is one of scale, right? Because there are only so many advisors, and obviously advisors need to make a certain amount of money sort of per client, and there's just a lot more people that need the help. And so it's hard to see a solution that doesn't include software, at least in part. But the question I have is another one about sort of whether or not these programs should be voluntary or not. So there's a lot of talk about whether a given strategy in one's 401k should be opt-in or opt-out. Do you have a view on that?
Well, I think for saving money, opting in or automatic opt-in, auto enrollment, and auto escalate, those are all features that I strongly advocate for employers in their 401k plan. The success of those has encouraged people like me and other researchers to say, well, what kind of auto features could we have in the payout phase? And it's just a lot more complex in the payout phase to have some kind of an automatic structure there. And so my preference is that the employer has some way of engaging the employee to make decisions rather than just all default into some kind of a decision regarding payout. But I do want to say that a lot of 401k plans do have a default payout solution, and it happens to be the required minimum distribution with the target date fund, and our research shows that's not a bad strategy. So I think the plans, they have this default. If somebody just doesn't do anything, that's what they're going to default into. But much better decisions would be made if they engage and have an informed decision.
Oh, this is great.
Let me just say one thing.
Sure.
Can I just share kind of a fantasy that I have?
Please.
And I think the technology is available now to do this, is that someone develops an avatar. And that avatar is programmed by Nobel Prize winners, Robert Merton, Bill Sharp, Bill Bingen, or Wade Pfau. They do the programming of this avatar, and the avatar can kind of talk with the retiree, and maybe the avatar, if the avatar changes to be more friendly to that specific person, and that avatar is programmed to be your fiduciary. They're not going to say something that might benefit them. I'm smiling as I say this because I don't know if this will happen. But actually, I think it's possible. And the only problem with this idea is that who's going to make money at this? So I just wanted to throw that out there because I think the technology is such that is possible. And as we progress through the next 10, 15, 20 years, and as our kids start retiring, they might be more amenable to that kind of solution. So I just had to share that.
Oh, I agree with you. Well, machine learning would be technology is right at our fingertips, right? Which is set up 500 financial plans, right? Pull them together, the tax returns. Steve will sit you in a room, wait another, and come out with recommendations. We could build a machine learning model. I think it's interesting. Is that going to be valuable for the person, or to your point, is this software that's going to assist an advisor? Because it's complicated stuff. I mean, I may know, Ramsey knows this, man, I know more about guaranteed, lifetime income benefits than ever. Now, ask me about optimizing my Social Security. Somebody else should probably be doing that. Well, do I have a team of people, or do I have a tool in here that can actually, amplify my advice? What do you think, Ramsey?
So I think that for the scale reasons I was talking about earlier, and for the breadth of knowledge reasons that you're bringing up right now, I think there has to be a role for software down the road. I'm of the view that perhaps the most valuable thing that an advisor provides is literally just the emotional part, the human interaction part. And you can see a world where a lot of the intellectual part of what we do is handled by the machines, and increasingly the advisor is essentially a financial therapist. So I've always So that's sort of my view. So Steve, I like your idea. I like your idea of an avatar. I think it makes sense in the long run.
Yeah, and Ramsey, I like your phrase, financial therapist. Actually, that's pretty good. I like it.
Yeah, I think I need my own sometimes when I come home. But so Steve, I have open, and I'm going to put this link in our show notes, a link to Don't Go Broke in Retirement, a simple plan to build lifetime retirement income on Amazon. I'll put that link in here. It looks, you sold me on the book. Just follow it up on Ramsey's emotional comment. What keeps you going? I mean, this is a lot to work, a lot of energy to put in. You could be off with your family, California. California's a great place just to hang out. Why? Why are you still doing this? What keeps you going?
Well, thanks, Paul. I just like helping people, and I've got skills and experience that can help people with these decisions, and so that's what keeps me going. Don't get me wrong, I get time to play, and we take trips, and we just got back. We spent 2 weeks with our grandkids, who we hadn't seen in 2.5 years in person, and so they live in the East Coast, and so we just got back from 2 weeks with the grandkids. So I'm putting it in there. And I think that's actually a model for people in their 60s and 70s, balance helping people in some way, in some kind of work, with what gives you joy and pleasure. And for a lot of people, it's hanging out with their family, but also it's travel and hobbies and interests, and just having a balance of all that and having a rich life. That's not only is that what's fun for me, but I've seen the research. This will help me live longer, help me be healthier, help me keep my wits longer. So that's the whole picture that I like to advocate to people.
Ramsey, thoughts? Final questions?
So I think we covered a lot of ground. I'm delighted, Steve, that you were able to join us, and we are absolutely going to want to have you back. Before the end of the year, I'm sure, to speak with us further. This has been great. I'm particularly intrigued by this notion that you put out of the three different options that should exist, at retirement, coming out of the 401k. So like the Social Security bridge, the annuity, and obviously the drawdown strategy as well. Usually the decision is take an annuity payment or if that's available. It's not always available, or take a lump sum. So I like the fact you've added in the Social Security bridge strategy, because I think a lot of people struggle with figuring out what that should look like. So I'm intrigued, and I will follow up on that one.
Right, and actually the strategy is less of a fixed strategy, is more of a decision process.
Sure.
Because I like to say, once you've optimized Social Security, then sit back and say, do I need more guaranteed income to make me feel good? And if that's the case, that's where you go to the annuity option. Yeah. And I think most people do feel more comfortable with guaranteed income. And so think of that strategy as more of a decision process, simplified for the average person.
Sure. You're preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
Great. Well, we can sing along together.
Okay, well, Steve, thank you. Ramsey, thank you. Thanks to all our listeners, and join us again next week for another episode of That Annuity Show. Thanks.
Hey, Paul, Ramsey, thanks for having me, and I'll be glad to come back.
Real pleasure.